I felt pretty good till 3K, to be honest. I was barely breathing. Even 4K, I guess. In any given run, you'll notice that one of your leg or your breathing will go first. Now this is simplified to leg fatigue and cardiorespiratory fatigue. I'm going to do my gym session right now, but while I do it, I'm going to explain to you what the differences are and what they potentially mean and the implications of it. So I thought I'd make this video today because I haven't seen that many videos, or if any at all, talking about this sort of stuff. And it is actually an interesting topic to talk about. Because when you do finish a race, you're always like, oh, my legs held me back, or I was breathing too hard and I couldn't go faster. So we're going to talk about the exact reasoning behind why that is. So let's quickly define the two types of fatigue. Leg fatigue is referring to the body's inability to, sustain and keep up with the workload. So your muscles' inability to keep up. And this is usually due to energy depletion, so low glycogen stores. It could also be too much lactate buildup in the muscles. And it could also be muscle strain or that sort of like muscle damage. Whereas cardiorespiratory fatigue is more referring to your body's inability to keep up with the oxygen demand. And that's going to impact your heart rate, your lungs. So essentially we're talking about the heart and lung organs. I don't know how this is going to work doing gym and explaining everything. I feel like I can only concentrate on one thing at a time. So to touch a bit on what each type of fatigue feels like, muscle fatigue is more referring to heaviness, stiffness, soreness, that kind of thing. Whereas cardiorespiratory fatigue feels more like, you're breathing hard, your heart rate can't keep up, you can't meet the oxygen demand. And the common causes of these are quite distinguishable as well. So you tend to get muscle fatigue a bit more when you're doing those long runs because you're out there for a long time. It's a lot of work for your muscles, isn't it? But on the other hand, when you're running really quick, your body has to meet the oxygen demand. You need a certain level of oxygen to keep up with the workload. Oxygen is obviously essential to producing the power and energy. And there is pretty much a correlation between how hard you're working and how much oxygen your body uses. And then you hit VO2 max, which is the most amount of oxygen you can use at a given time, given intensity. And then obviously beyond that, it becomes really hard. There's way more of an anaerobic contribution afterwards. But interestingly, it's not actually just limited towards how long or short or intense the exercise is. There's more factors involved, like how new you are to running, which makes this all very interesting. But before we get into that, we have to understand a few concepts. So obviously we've heard of muscle hypertrophy, and that's, your muscles getting stronger, or it might even be muscles getting bigger. I forgot which one it is, but it's one of them. But I'm talking about muscles getting stronger. And this adaptation happens in a shorter time frame compared to your cardiorespiratory system, which I've already talked about in several videos in the past. We're talking about stroke volume, the amount of blood is pumped per beat of the heart, so your heart getting stronger. Capillarization, more capillaries around the muscles, so better oxygen transport. Obviously, that's going to translate to better cardiorespiratory system, meaning less cardiorespiratory fatigue. We're also talking about mitochondrial density, the ability for the muscles to process that oxygen and turn it into energy. And all those factors take a little bit longer than muscle hypertrophy or, muscle adaptations at the start. So a lot of the times you'll find that beginner runners tend to breathe really hard when running, even if it's not that fast of a run, because your body's ability to meet the oxygen demand for running is not as good. There's also stuff like running economy as well. It takes a while for your body to run a bit more efficiently, and it takes less oxygen to do a certain speed and whatnot. And that's why the elite runners have a faster velocity at VO2 max, a faster velocity at LT2, because they're really efficient, and they've also developed a really good system, more capillaries. Again, we're talking about all the stuff I did before, lactate tolerance, and every single factor that I always talk about. So you may find that in general, if we're really generalizing it, you'll notice that beginner runners tend to hit cardiorespiratory fatigue first, and then elite runners are hindered more by their muscles not being able to keep up. And that's certainly the case for me. I did a half marathon recently, broke the course record, but as you see in a lot of elite sports as well, I was not breathing that hard at the end. I was perfectly fine to, talk to the organizer, thank them, and talk about the race course and how it was and all that immediately after I finished running. But could I have run faster on that day? Probably not, because my legs are pretty tired from that. So that's why I see people commenting all the time online about, not me, but like Olympians and stuff like that, finishing a race, and they barely seem like they work. But in reality, their legs are probably cooked, but it's just they're not breathing as hard. And this is more the case, again, for the longer races, and less so to do with the shorter races. Obviously, if someone does a 100-meter sprint, 400 meters, even 1500, that can be really taxing on the cardiorespiratory system, because we are running VO2 max. We're running more than our body's ability to use oxygen very efficiently. As you move to races that are slower than VO2 max, that's when you kind of notice that the athletes aren't actually breathing that hard. If I'm running a marathon, I'm probably chilling for most of it, or if not all of it, in terms of the cardiorespiratory system. Meanwhile, my legs are dying. Now, are we always limited by the same type of fatigue every single day? Absolutely not, because it depends what you've done in the days prior as well. If you've done a lot of hard runs in a row, obviously your legs are going to hold you back a lot more than your cardiorespiratory system. It's definitely context dependent, but it's also cool to know that in general, you might be held back by one or the other. This topic is also super interesting for people coming back from injury as well, because we already know that it takes longer to get the cardiorespiratory adaptations compared to the muscle adaptations. When I'm coming back from injury, I haven't lost as much cardiorespiratory adaptations compared to muscle adaptations. If I'm not running, I'm not used to the pounding on the legs anymore, and I lose that way quicker than I lose my lower heart rate compared to the population, my VO2 max, and my capillarization and all that. That doesn't go in a short amount of time, but your muscles will definitely get weaker in a pretty short amount of time. But if you compare that to a beginner is being held back still by their cardiorespiratory system, their heart rate, their lungs, body's ability to meet the oxygen demand. But me coming back from injury, yes, I'm unfit, but my cardiorespiratory system is already very developed, and I would have to take a very long time to lose all that, but my muscles are holding me back. So we're held back by different types of fatigue. So when I come back from injury, I'm more focused on a lot of frequencies. So I want to try and increase the frequency of running, which I've talked about in several videos in the past before as well. I want to get my legs used to the pounding on the legs quite often. So I don't need to do those 60-minute runs, long runs and all that to get the cardiorespiratory system back. Obviously, it is in my best interest to get that back as well. But my first priority is to get my legs used to the pounding on the legs. And the best way to do that is get out there more frequently. Ideally, don't take 2 days off in a row. I just want to run as frequently as I can. I want to run almost every day, but keep the runs short until I get used to it and slowly build that up. The funny thing is right now, when I'm doing my threshold workouts, VO2 max workouts, I'm held back way more by my legs. So I'm barely breathing at the end of the workouts, but my legs are like, you can't go any faster. And yeah, I just feel sore from like the easiest of workouts that wouldn't have even been, hard at all back then. So yeah, I think this is why I wanted to make this video, because it's just interesting talking about, stuff that you've been thinking about during the runs. And obviously it might sound pretty nerdy to think about that sort of stuff during the run and not like what I want for dinner afterwards. But my brain just works like that. I'm always curious about why something is, and then I try and think about it more, and then I realize that this is the case, So next now I'll talk about how we can work on both of these types of fatigue. Now, with muscular fatigue, I'm sorry, my balance on my left leg is so bad. Let's see if my right's better. With muscle fatigue, it's bad on both. But to be fair, this is an 8 kg kettlebell and it's pretty hard to do this. But with muscle fatigue, you should work on strength training because we want our muscles to be able to handle the load a bit better, and also increase the amount of easy runs we're doing. So try and build that volume up, get the legs used to going for a longer amount of time. Focus on that frequency like I talked about earlier. Yeah, all the small things that get the legs more accustomed to the load, the forces that we're putting through the body when we're running. Because the more you can do that, the more you can handle it, and the further you can run without your muscles getting fatigued. Obviously, threshold training comes into play as well. Lactate buildup in the muscles also contributes to more muscle fatigue. And like I mentioned earlier, glycogen depletion. If you run out of glycogen storage, your muscles are going to struggle to keep up, actually produce the forces that are required for running. And on the other hand, when we're talking about cardiorespiratory fatigue, we obviously need to work a bit more on your body's ability to use oxygen. And this takes a bit more time, so you kind of have to be quite patient with it. But it's also about, those cardiorespiratory adaptations. So you just need to get the long runs in still, the runs in. So in general, everything is gonna help with everything, but I guess there are certain nuances to consider. Like when we're talking about our breathing rate, we obviously need to work at a higher intensity so that we can stress the system a bit and let the body have to adapt to more oxygen demand. Because when we're running VO2 max workouts, we are working at our limit of how much oxygen we can utilize efficiently. So sometimes doing VO2 max workouts is important. Like you shouldn't just fixate on threshold, which a lot of people are starting to do nowadays. But this is why variety in training is so important. You have to do everything in order to improve everything, because we already talked about muscle fatigue, cardiorespiratory fatigue. There's different types of factors that cause both, and every single one of those factors you can improve in different ways. So that's why you kind of have to hit all different types of things that all help and give a net positive to your running, which is what I love about running. Like, too many people obsess over one specific thing, but in reality, you should always be trying to get like 1% gains in every single category that will help you out. The other interesting thing is the sympathetic nervous system and how it comes into play. So obviously the sympathetic nervous system is commonly known as the fight or flight response. And with the fight or flight response, you're obviously in like a stressful situation, adrenaline's gonna be pumping and your breathing rate naturally just increases when you are, relying on the sympathetic nervous system more. Yeah, your heart rate increases as well. And all these things, it's kind of not in our control, right? If we're doing something that's unfamiliar, we get into that kind of nervous state, and yeah, the sympathetic nervous system fight or flight response comes into play a bit more. So there's nothing you can do at the start, but as you get familiar with running and you realize that it's not that scary, which will happen over time, you won't trigger that body's response. That will probably help a little bit with, not hitting cardiorespiratory fatigue first. But let's make it super clear though, at the start, when you are new to running, you can work on everything. Like, just because you are held back by your breathing rate, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do the strength training and the stuff that will help your muscles be able to handle more load. We should be working on both, because both of them are low, but it just happens to be that cardiorespiratory fatigue is holding you back a little bit more than your muscle fatigue. But overall, we can work on both. And even if you are elite, like, one of them will be holding you back, and there's always space to improve. So I know that right now, from my recent workouts, I can tell that my muscles are holding me back. I'm not used to running a lot anymore. Like, I can't run 100 Ks a week right now because I'm coming back from injury. Whereas before, it was a no-brainer. I would do that happily every single week for a year straight. So I kind of know what I want to focus more on, but I still want to focus on improving my VO2 max. My VO2 max went down a lot, but not as much as my muscles' ability to handle the load. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope it got you thinking about more stuff. That's what I want to do with my channel. I want to talk about these different topics that do trigger conversations and also make you think deeper about your training, what you can do, and all that sort of stuff. Running is complicated, and I love that it is complicated. There's just so many things you can work on. As usual, there's a buy me a coffee link in the description. All money raised in this month is going to contribute to this trip that I'm going to take. I'm going to take a bullet train down southwest of Japan, and that's going to cost a lot of money, but yeah, all the ad revenue and also donations will contribute to that, and hopefully I can make a few good videos out there. I might even do a 5K time trial or something like that, but we'll see. And we have a special guest that we're going to meet there, so it's going to be super exciting. Apart from that, leave a like, comment below what you thought of this video, and I will see you in the next one. And also, I barely got any strength done in that video. I can't focus on two things at once, so I'm going to finish off my strength workout because I should.